Have you ever won an argument but lost your peace? Have you ever been right but felt completely wrong on the inside? Today, I want to invite you into a radical shift, choosing peace over the constant need to be right. Because sometimes being right costs you everything that truly matters. When we talk about the need to be right, what we're really talking about is the ego. But instead of framing ego as some mystical or abstract idea, let's look at what's actually happening inside our brains when we feel that surge of urgency to correct someone, to defend our perspective, or to prove that our view of the world is the truth. The human brain is wired for survival, and survival often meant being part of a tribe. Belonging was safety. Disagreement, on the other hand, could feel like exile. That's why, even today, a simple argument about something as trivial as directions, politics, or even which restaurant has the best coffee can set off the same neural circuits that once fired when our ancestors were threatened by predators. When someone challenges our opinion, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, lights up like a warning alarm. It says, "This is danger, protect yourself." And protecting yourself in this context often means digging in, doubling down, raising your voice, or at the very least rehearsing your counter-arguments in your head. But here's the problem: what the amygdala flags as a threat isn't actually life or death. It's simply an idea, a perspective. The nervous system, however, doesn't know the difference between a real tiger and a figurative one. So you feel the same physiological rush, your heart rate increases, your muscles tighten, cortisol spikes. The body is preparing for combat, even though the battlefield is just your kitchen or your workplace. Now think about the cost of letting that system run unchecked. Each time we enter into this loop, we reinforce the circuitry that says, "I must be right or I'm unsafe." This is what neuroscientists call a closed loop, a repetitive cycle where thought, emotion, and physiology keep fueling each other. You feel threatened, so you argue. You argue, so you feel more threatened, and round it goes. What if we disrupted that loop? What if, instead of letting the amygdala call the shots, we invited another part of the brain into the conversation? The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for perspective, taking, emotional regulation, and decision-making. When you pause, breathe, and consciously choose to let go of the need to be right, you shift activation away from survival mode into higher order thinking. You're telling your nervous system, we're not in danger. We don't need to fight. We're safe. This isn't about suppressing your opinions or silencing yourself. It's about asking a more powerful question: is being right worth the biological price tag? Because make no mistake, there is a price. Chronic activation of stress responses, those arguments, those heated exchanges that never really resolve, keep your body marinating in cortisol and adrenaline. Over time, that impacts your sleep, your focus, your relationships, even your immune system. You may win the argument, but you lose your health. Let me give you a real-world example. Picture two people in traffic, both convinced they're right. One cuts the other off, and suddenly, both drivers are honking, yelling, gesturing wildly. In those moments, neither of them is actually thinking clearly. Their nervous systems are hijacked, and when they finally drive off still fuming, they're carrying that stress into the rest of their day. The brain is replaying the event, amplifying it, creating stronger pathways for anger and resentment. Now multiply that by every argument, every conflict, every time you felt the need to be right. That's a heavy load to carry through life. But imagine instead that same driver taking a breath and simply saying to themselves, "I could be right about this, but I choose peace." The nervous system immediately shifts, heart rate drops, muscles relax. The parasympathetic system, the one responsible for rest, healing, and recovery, activates. The body returns to balance. Nothing external had to change. The traffic didn't suddenly clear. The other driver didn't apologize. But internally, a shift happened from ego to equilibrium. This is the real liberation, understanding that you don't have to outsource your peace to someone else's behavior or opinion. You can regulate your nervous system in the moment. You can train your brain to prioritize peace over proof. And the more you practice, the more automatic it becomes. The pathways for stress weaken, and the pathways for calm strengthen. Neuroplasticity works in your favor. So when we say being at peace rather than being right, we're not just talking about philosophy. We're talking about biology. We're talking about reclaiming authorship over your own state, over the way your brain and body respond to life. Every time you resist the pull of the ego and choose stillness instead of combat, you're literally rewiring your nervous system for freedom. And the truth is, when you no longer need to be right, you discover something far greater. You're already whole, you're already safe, and peace was available to you all along. Closing line: because the one who no longer needs to win can never truly lose. When people hear the word peace, many immediately equate it with passivity, with softness, even with weakness. We live in a culture that often celebrates being loud, forceful, and uncompromising, so it can feel counterintuitive to think of peace as a form of strength. But if you look closely at both biology and human behavior, what you find is that peace is not only powerful, it's the highest expression of power. Here's why. The human nervous system is designed to oscillate between two main states: sympathetic activation, which is fight or flight, and parasympathetic activation, which is rest, repair, and recovery. when you argue, when you raise your voice, when you dig into a battle just to prove yourself, you're engaging your sympathetic system. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream, your heart rate spikes, your pupils dilate, and your body prepares for conflict. Now, in a real emergency, that system is essential, it keeps you alive. But when it's chronically activated in daily interactions, it drains you. It steals energy from your ability to think clearly, connect meaningfully, and stay healthy. Now compare that to the power of someone who can stay calm in the middle of conflict. Their parasympathetic system remains online. Their heart rate variability stays high, which is a biomarker of resilience and adaptability. They're not reacting, they're choosing. That's power. Because true power is the ability to regulate yourself in situations where most people lose control. Think of it this way: anyone can shout. Anyone can throw fuel on the fire. That's easy, because it's simply letting biology run its automatic course. But to pause, to breathe, to listen even when you disagree, that requires mastery. It's not passive. It's active regulation of the nervous system. And when people witness that, they feel it. They sense stability and it influences them. Just as stress is contagious, so is calm. When one person remains peaceful, it actually co-regulates the nervous systems of the people around them. That is a silent but undeniable form of leadership. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine a workplace meeting where ideas are clashing. Tensions rise, voices overlap, and you can feel the collective stress building. Then one person speaks, not loudly, not aggressively, but calmly, clearly, and without defensiveness. Suddenly the energy in the room shifts. People lean in. The shouting diminishes. The conversation resets. That person didn't dominate the room by force. They influenced it through the strength of their presence. That's peace functioning as power. It's also important to understand that peace is not the absence of boundaries. Choosing peace doesn't mean becoming a doormat or avoiding difficult conversations. It means you approach those conversations from a regulated state with clarity rather than reactivity. Neuroscience shows that when you're calm, your prefrontal cortex is fully online, allowing for better decision-making, perspective-taking, and problem-solving. In contrast, when you're in a stressed state, that same region goes offline, and you lose access to your most sophisticated tools. In other words, when you choose peace, you don't lose power, you gain access to a deeper, smarter form of it. There's also a long-term dimension here. Stressful encounters leave an imprint on the body. Elevated cortisol and adrenaline don't just vanish the moment the argument ends, they linger, shaping your biology over time. They impact your sleep, your metabolism, even the way your immune system functions. Peace, however, builds a different kind of imprint. It strengthens resilience pathways in the brain, increases the ability to recover quickly from stress, and even improves emotional memory. So when you choose peace, you're literally training your nervous system for endurance. You're creating a reservoir of stability that allows you to withstand bigger storms later. Now think about the people in history or in your own life who embody real power. The ones we remember as transformative leaders, healers, or visionaries. Were they the ones constantly proving themselves right? Or were they the ones whose very presence brought steadiness to chaos, who diffused conflict by embodying calm? That's the kind of power that endures. Because peace doesn't shout, it resonates. What's also remarkable is how accessible this power is. You don't need external validation, you don't need resources, and you don't need the world to behave a certain way. You only need to decide in the moment to step out of the automatic stress response and into a deliberate state of calm. That choice is available in every conversation, every disagreement, every challenge. And each time you make it, you reinforce the neural circuits of peace, making it more natural, more automatic, and more powerful. So the next time you're faced with conflict, notice what's happening in your body. Notice the surge of adrenaline, the tightening of the jaw, the impulse to prove. And then remember, you have a choice. You can let the biology of fight or flight drive the moment, or you can access a deeper strength, the power to stay grounded, composed, and unshaken. There's a hidden cost every time we prioritize being right over being at peace. On the surface, it might look like we've won the argument or defended our position or held our ground. But if we look deeper, into our biology, into our relationships, and into the way our lives feel day to day, we begin to see that the real cost is far greater than whatever short-term satisfaction we gain from proving ourselves. Think about the last time you got into a heated disagreement. Maybe it was with your partner, a family member, a colleague, or even a stranger. What did it actually feel like in your body? Chances are your heart rate increased, your muscles tensed, and you had a sense of urgency, almost like the conversation was a battlefield. From a neurological perspective, that makes sense. The brain interprets opposition as a kind of threat, and in response, the stress system turns on, cortisol rises. Adrenaline floods the body, and while those chemicals can give you energy and focus in a real emergency, in an argument they simply keep you stuck in a loop of defense and attack. Now here's the cost. Those physiological reactions don't just disappear when the argument is over. Even after the words stop, your body remains activated. Your thoughts replay the conflict. You rehearse what you said, what they said, what you wish you had said. This is what neuroscientists call rumination. And rumination is essentially reactivating the stress response again and again, even when the conflict itself has ended. The body keeps paying long after the conversation is done. And then there's the emotional cost. Each time we insist on being right, we create distance. We might win the debate, but we often lose connection. Relationships, whether romantic, familial, or professional, don't thrive on correctness, they thrive on trust and safety. When people feel constantly corrected, dismissed, or invalidated, their nervous systems register that as rejection. Over time, the bond frays. What started as a small disagreement can, if repeated often enough, grow into resentment, withdrawal, and disconnection. The need to be right can quietly erode the very relationships we most value. It's important to recognize that being right doesn't always mean being truthful. It often just means being rigid. The brain has a bias known as confirmation bias, which means we tend to notice and remember information that supports our existing beliefs, while ignoring or dismissing information that challenges them. So even when we think we're defending the truth, we may simply be defending our perspective. And the harder we push, the more we convince ourselves we're justified. But truth and connection aren't the same thing. You can be factually correct and still be relationally destructive. Consider a family dinner where one person corrects another over a small detail, a date, a name, a fact in a story. The correction might be accurate, but the atmosphere changes. Laughter and warmth are replaced by tension. No one feels safer, no one feels closer, but the right fact has been established. That's the cost. Was it worth it? And then there's the toll on our mental health. When you live in a state of constant defense, always scanning for mistakes in others, always ready to prove yourself, you keep your nervous system in a chronic state of vigilance. That vigilance is exhausting. It depletes focus, drains creativity, and shortens patience. Over time, it can manifest as anxiety, irritability, or burnout. All because the brain has been tricked into believing that every disagreement is a fight for survival. But survival isn't what most of us are after anymore. What we're really seeking, whether we admit it or not, is connection, ease, and meaning. And ironically, the harder we fight to be right, the further we move from those deeper needs. The body suffers, the mind suffers, the relationship suffers. Winning in the short term becomes losing in the long term. The great paradox is this: the moment you stop needing to be right, you start to see more clearly. Your perspective expands. You're able to listen without rehearsing your counterpoints. You notice nuances, you find common ground, you open the door to collaboration. In that space, peace naturally arises, and with it comes a deeper form of rightness. Not the kind that needs to be proven, but the kind that simply feels aligned. So the next time you feel the urge to correct someone, to insist, to push, pause and ask yourself, what will this cost me? Will I trade my health, my peace, or my relationship just to establish a point? Is it worth the tension in my body, the stress in my system, the disconnection that follows? Or is it more powerful to let go, to allow space, to choose peace? Because every time we sacrifice peace for the illusion of being right, we pay with the things that matter most. When we're in conversation, it's easy to fall into the reflex of correction. Someone says something maybe slightly inaccurate or maybe very different from how we see the world, and immediately the brain prepares a counterpoint. We lean forward, we interrupt, we explain, we correct. And in that moment, even if the words are accurate, what we've really done is create distance. Because correction is about establishing hierarchy. It says, I know better than you. Connection, on the other hand, says, I want to understand you. And those two things produce very different outcomes in both the brain and the relationship. From a neuroscience standpoint, humans are wired to seek belonging. When someone listens to us without judgment, when they allow us to express our view even if it's different from theirs, our brain releases oxytocin, a neurochemical associated with bonding and trust. The vagus nerve, which regulates calm states, becomes more active. We feel safe. But when someone corrects us abruptly, especially in front of others, the opposite happens. The brain interprets it as a social threat. The amygdala activates, cortisol rises, and suddenly the conversation is no longer about ideas, it's about survival. That shift moves people into defense mode, where the priority isn't connection but protection. This is why choosing connection over correction is such a powerful practice. It doesn't mean you agree with everything someone says. It means you value the relationship more than the immediate impulse to fix or prove. It's about creating space where people feel seen and heard, which ironically makes them more open to new perspectives in the long run. Neuroscience shows that when someone feels safe and connected, their prefrontal cortex is more active, which means they're actually more capable of learning, integrating, and adapting. In other words, connection makes change possible. Correction without connection just creates resistance. Think about the conversations that have left the biggest impact on you. Chances are, it wasn't the times when someone told you how wrong you were. It was the times when someone really listened, asked questions, and made you feel understood. That safety gave you the freedom to reflect and grow without feeling attacked. The brain thrives in environments of psychological safety, and we each have the ability to create that environment in our interactions. There's a very practical shift you can try. The next time you feel the urge to say, that's not right, pause and replace it with, tell me more about why you see it that way. What you're doing there is signaling curiosity instead of correction. Curiosity activates dopamine pathways in the brain, both for you and for the person you're speaking with. The conversation becomes exploratory rather than adversarial. And in that state, both people are more engaged, more open, and more connected. This shift also changes the energy in families and workplaces. Imagine a parent who constantly corrects a child. Over time, the child begins to feel small, inadequate, or unseen. But imagine instead a parent who listens, who asks questions, who says, "That's interesting. Why do you think that?" The child learns to think critically without fear of shame. They build confidence, resilience, and trust in the relationship. The difference isn't in the facts, it's in the approach. The same principle applies in professional settings. A leader who always corrects shuts down creativity. Team members learn to play it safe, to stop offering ideas because they don't want to be embarrassed. But a leader who prioritizes connection creates a culture of innovation. People share more, take risks, and collaborate. That environment isn't built on who's right, it's built on mutual respect and safety. There's also a personal benefit here. When you shift from correction to connection, you reduce your own stress load. Correcting others keeps your nervous system in a constant state of vigilance, always scanning for errors, always ready to react. But when you focus on connection, you shift into a calmer, more regulated state. Your own body benefits from the choice to stay open rather than defensive. Peace is preserved not just in the relationship, but within yourself. And this is the deeper lesson. Every time you choose connection over correction, you're signaling to your brain and body that safety matters more than ego, that peace matters more than pride. And that shift, practiced consistently, rewires your nervous system for greater resilience and harmony. Over time, it becomes less about what was said and more about how it felt to be with you. People may forget the details of the conversation, but they will never forget how safe, understood, and connected they felt in your presence. So the real question becomes in this moment, do I want to win the point, or do I want to strengthen the bond? Because one will satisfy the ego for a moment, but the other will nourish both people for a lifetime. One of the hardest things for the human brain to do is let go of control. We are wired to predict, to plan, to manage outcomes. The brain is essentially a prediction machine. It constantly scans the environment, compares it to past experiences, and generates models of what might happen next. That ability has kept us alive for thousands of years. But in the modern world, this same drive for control often becomes a source of unnecessary stress, especially when it comes to how we deal with other people. When someone disagrees with us or behaves in a way we don't like, the impulse is to correct, to manage, to control their response. We think, if I can just get them to see it my way, then everything will be okay. But that's not how it works. The more we try to control another person's perspective, the more resistance we create. Their nervous system, just like ours, detects that attempt as a kind of threat, a subtle pressure on their autonomy. And when people feel their autonomy is threatened, they push back. This is called psychological reactance, and it's a well-studied phenomenon in behavioral science. The very act of trying to control someone often guarantees the opposite outcome of what we want. But there's something liberating that happens when we realize we don't actually need to manage every opinion or every outcome. Peace begins the moment we accept that other people's thoughts and actions are not ours to control. Our nervous system relaxes, the grip loosens, and suddenly we reclaim energy that was previously wasted in battles we were never meant to fight. Think about how nature handles this. The ocean doesn't resist the waves, it allows them. If it absorbs them, it flows with them. If it tried to fight or control every wave, it would lose its essence. In the same way, when we let go of control in conversations or conflicts, we're not giving up, we're aligning with a deeper rhythm. We're choosing to flow instead of fight. There's also a neurological benefit here. When we cling to control, we stay locked in sympathetic activation, fight, flight, or freeze. But when we let go, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the part responsible for regulation, healing, and balance. Heart rate variability improves, stress hormones decrease, and the brain enters a more coherent, adaptive state. This isn't just philosophy, it's biology. Letting go of control isn't only good for relationships, it's good for your brain and body. Let's put this into a real-world example. Imagine you're in a meeting and someone strongly disagrees with you. You feel that rise of energy in your body, the urge to jump in, to insist, to prove. That's the control reflex. But if instead you pause, breathe, and allow their perspective to exist without needing to dismantle it, you've created space. And in that space, two things happen. You preserve your own peace, and you give them the dignity of being heard. Ironically, people are often more willing to consider your perspective when they don't feel forced. Influence is most powerful when it isn't about control. The same principle applies in personal relationships. A partner who feels constantly managed or corrected eventually feels suffocated. But when they sense they are free to be themselves, even if you disagree, they naturally become more open, more connected. The paradox is clear. The less you try to control, the more harmony you experience. Now, this doesn't mean you allow harmful behavior or abandon boundaries. Boundaries are healthy, and they're very different from control. Boundaries say, here's what I need to remain healthy in this relationship. Control says, you need to change so that I can feel safe. One empowers both people, the other diminishes them. And peace always comes from empowerment, not from domination. Letting go of control is also an act of trust. Trust in yourself, in the resilience of your nervous system, and in the unfolding of life. Neuroscience tells us that uncertainty is one of the hardest states for the brain to manage. But the more we practice sitting with uncertainty, the more tolerance we build. That's what real strength looks like, not the ability to control every outcome, but the capacity to remain steady in the middle of uncertainty. So much of our suffering comes from trying to orchestrate what was never ours to orchestrate. When we release that need, we discover how much lighter life feels. We find that peace was never about the external world behaving the way we want. It was about the internal freedom to stay balanced no matter how the world behaves. The truth is, control is an illusion. Peace is real, and every time we choose to let go, we step out of illusion and into freedom. There's something remarkable about being in the presence of someone who is deeply at peace. You can feel it before they say a word. Their energy is steady, their nervous system is regulated, and that regulation radiates outward. We often underestimate how much our internal state affects others, but neuroscience shows that we are constantly co-regulating. The rhythms of our nervous system sync with the people around us. Heart rates, breathing patterns, even micro-expressions on the face, all of these are contagious. Which means that when you choose peace, you're not only influencing yourself, you're shaping the state of everyone around you. Think about how powerful that really is. Most people walk into a room carrying stress, urgency, and the residue of unresolved conflicts. But if you walk in calm, grounded, and unshaken, you become the anchor, you shift the baseline of the room. Without saying anything, you give people permission to soften, to relax, to breathe more fully. That's influence on a biological level. That's what it means to live as a presence of peace. From a scientific standpoint, this has everything to do with the vagus nerve and heart rate variability. When your own nervous system is balanced, when you're breathing calmly and your heart rate is stable, those signals are picked up by others. Their mirror neurons respond, their physiology begins to align with yours, and a kind of collective regulation takes place. We've all experienced this in reverse too. The person who walks into a space anxious or aggressive and immediately raises the tension for everyone. So the choice becomes clear. You can be the source of tension or you can be the source of peace. Living as peace doesn't mean avoiding difficult situations. It means bringing calm into them. Imagine a family argument that's escalating. Voices are raised, tempers are flaring, and everyone feels pulled into the chaos. Then one person chooses not to match the intensity. They lower their voice, they keep their body relaxed, they listen instead of interrupting. Slowly, the dynamic shifts. People begin to mirror that calm. The volume decreases, the argument loses its charge. One nervous system regulating itself influenced an entire group. That's the power of presence. The same thing happens in leadership. The most effective leaders aren't the ones who dominate through fear or constantly demand to be right. They're the ones whose calm steadiness builds trust, especially in crisis. When everything is falling apart, people look to the one who isn't panicking. And it's not just psychological, it's physiological. Their stability actually helps regulate the group's collective stress response. That's why a peaceful presence is such a powerful form of leadership. It also changes the quality of our closest relationships. A partner, a child, a friend, they don't always remember the details of what you say, but they remember how they feel in your presence. If they feel safe, if they feel understood, if they feel calm when they're around you, the bond deepens. That's the kind of legacy peace creates. Not a list of arguments won, but a trail of moments where people felt at ease in your company. What's striking is that peace's presence is not about effort, it's about alignment. You don't need to manufacture it. You simply need to regulate your own nervous system and let others experience the benefit. And regulation comes through practices we can all access. Breathing deeply, pausing before reacting, grounding our attention in the body, choosing curiosity instead of judgment. These small acts accumulate. Over time, they rewire your baseline so that peace isn't something you visit occasionally, it's where you live. And here's the deeper layer: when you embody peace, you become a model. Other people begin to see what's possible. They see that conflict doesn't have to mean combat, that disagreement doesn't have to mean division. Your presence becomes a living example, a kind of permission slip for others to step out of the cycle of stress and into something calmer, clearer, more connected. That's influence on the deepest level, not through persuasion, but through demonstration. We all know the world doesn't lack for arguments. It doesn't lack for people needing to be right. What it does lack are people willing to be peace. And every time you choose to be that presence, in your home, in your workplace, in your community, you're contributing something rare and profoundly needed. You're creating a pocket of stability in a world that often feels chaotic, and the ripple effect of that is immeasurable. So the real invitation is to live in such a way that peace isn't just something you talk about, it's something people feel when they're around you. Because in the end, that presence, that calm, that steadiness, that safety is what endures long after the words are forgotten. Closing line: and when you live as a presence of peace, you don't just keep your own soul free, you become the refuge where others finally remember theirs. So tonight, I ask you, do you want to be right or do you want to be free? Every time you're tempted to argue, remember this: the one who chooses peace is never defeated. The one who chooses peace is always right in the deepest way possible.